Good evening, people of the internet. My name is Anto. Welcome to another stream. This evening is going to be a little bit more cozy because I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. So I've got my kind of snooty thing on, and we're going to be doing a first impressions of the new Monster Manual this evening. It has dropped on D&D Beyond today. So we're going to be going through that, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on some of the monsters, some of the design direction of the new Monster Manual. This completes the initial kind of core 3 books of the revised 5th edition rules, which I'm very excited about. I've been reading a little bit of the Monster Manual over the afternoon since it dropped, like 4-5 o'clock this afternoon UK time, and I already have a whole bunch of thoughts. The way this is going to work this evening, I'm not going to be showing the new stat blocks on D&D Beyond because I don't want any Pinkertons at my door. I don't have any like signed agreements with D&D or Wizards of the Coast, but I don't want them like striking my channel like they have done with people in the past, and I just don't want to risk that. So what we're going to do is, if I jump over to the desktop, we're going to throw up the old versions of stat blocks and we're going to put those on screen where appropriate, and then I'm going to talk about the new stat blocks, talk about the changes rather than showing them, just because I'm wary, just because it's literally gone live for people to see today. I really don't want to get hit by the old Watsy banhammer and have my life made any more difficult than it needs to be. As always with these streams, they go so much better the more people get involved, so do say hello in the chat, ask your questions if there's specific monsters that you want to see or you want me to talk about, or know what the major differences are, or anything like that. Throw it down in the chat down below. And I want to start with something super basic. Let's start with goblins. So we're going to go ahead here, and I am going to search for goblins on, I've got 2 screens open. I've got one that you can see, which has got all of the Monster Manual versions in there, which has all of the legacy tags on it now, and then I've got a version that I can see. So I'm going to be tabbing between those 2, and hopefully it's not going to cause any weird issues. I also need to turn my music down because I've got Taylor Swift in my ears so loud I can't even hear myself think. So the Goblin from 2014 is a 1/4 CR, and it's pretty basic, and I think that the goblin that we want to compare it to is the new Goblin Warrior. That's the 1/4 CR equivalent. So if we jump over to the desktop view so you can see the old goblin while I talk about the new goblin. Major differences here are the creature type. Creature type has changed from humanoid over to fey. This is something that we're seeing a lot of in this Monster Manual. Is a lot of the monsters that used to be creatures that were humanoid or humanoid with some additional characterization. Like for goblin, it was goblinoid as a bracketed parenthesis thing. They have changed. So goblins have changed to fey, gnolls have changed to fiends, Sahuagin have changed to fiends, Lamia have changed to fiends. A lot of things have changed to fiends. Night hags have changed to fiends. I watched the fiends video earlier today while I was scrolling through the Monster Manual. That's why it's so fresh in my mind. But a lot of stuff has changed its creature type, including goblins. So they're fey now, means broadly anything that specifically targets humanoids, so spells and certain abilities, isn't going to work on goblins anymore, isn't going to work on any of those creatures whose creature type has changed. I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about this. I think that I like it overall as a change, because it means that you're not going to run into as many situations where lower level magics and lower level abilities are taking creatures just out of the fight immediately. So one thing I'm thinking specifically are the likes of Hold Person. Hold Person is quite a low level spell. Actually, let's get another instance of D&D Beyond going on here so we can search up some spells, because we're going to want to search some spells as this evening goes on to reference different spells and magic. We'll reference the 24 versions of spells while we do this. So Hold Person, second level spell. Choose a humanoid target you can see within range. So no longer going to work on goblins, no longer going to work on gnolls, Sahugin, and a bunch of other creatures that have changed their creature type from humanoid to whatever it is that they are. In our goblins case, that's Fey. So you're going to need to rely on something like the Hold Monster spell, which I believe is like 4th level? I actually can't remember. It's so rare that I get to be a player. It's 5th level, so it's way more powerful. So it's just a creature. So that really means that the kind of threat that those spells and those abilities pose to monsters has dropped way down, which I'm really a fan of, because those are the kinds of spells that just instantly turn off fights and make them, like, occasionally that kind of instant disruption of a non-boss monster, something that doesn't have legendary resistances, can be entertaining to go, oh, look how easily we defeated this thing. But usually it is a less satisfying outcome than actually going through the process of a combat or going through the process of whatever that encounter was going to be, versus just the spellcaster clicking their fingers, holding them and being like, well, we'll do what we want now, otherwise we're going to stand in a circle around you and turn you into a fine paste. So our 2014 goblin had 15 AC, which is the same now, had 7 hit points. That's been upped to 10. That's something that we're going to see pretty much across the board. It gets more significant the higher up the CR you go. Most creatures have had a HP buff. A lot of the sub CR1 creatures have only had a couple points. If anything, some of them have had their HP lowered. But the higher up the CR you go, the more drastic the HP increase is going to get. And most monsters seem to have pretty significant HP bumps, especially if they previously had any kind of physical resistances. So bludgeoning, piercing, slashing. That's broadly gone away and been replaced with just buckets more HP. There's numerous monsters that have gone from sort of low 100 HP up into the 300s in terms of their HP. So monsters have gotten a big boost in that way. And then in terms of features, our 2014 goblin had Nimble Escape as a trait. This is something that we're going to see in a unified expression of rules in the new Monster Manual. Is anything that uses a bonus action is moving to specifically be in the bonus action section of the stat block. So Nimble Escape has been moved from traits into bonus actions. That just makes the stat block easier to read as the Dungeon Master, because if something is using a specific part of the action economy, you know that it's going to be where it should be. Like if something uses a reaction, it'll be in reactions. If it uses the bonus reaction, it'll be in the bonus actions. And that's a really nice quality of life thing for the GMs. And then in terms of attacks, previously the goblin was doing 5 damage with a scimitar and 5 damage with its bow, which is no longer the case. It's doing 5 damage base, but if it has advantage, it gets an extra 2 damage to each of its attacks. So it does 5 damage with its scimitar and its bow, just like it did in 2014. But if it has advantage, it gets to do an extra 2 damage, a 1d4. So they get like mini sneak attacks, which I really like. It really plays into the idea of goblins being sneaky and tricksy and playing into that expectation of what goblins should be. But I think the other goblins that got added in the revised Monster Manual are much more interesting. So if we have a look at some of their equivalents. So if we look at the Goblin Boss. The Goblin Boss in 2014, broadly the same as the regular goblin. Slightly higher AC, slightly higher hit points, does a little bit more damage, but its main thing is that redirect attack. When it sees a target, when a creature the goblin can see targets it with an attack, it can choose another goblin within 5 feet of it. The two swap places, and it targets that replacement. It still keeps that, so when a creature the goblins can see makes an attack roll against it, the goblin chooses a small or medium ally within 5 feet of itself. Goblin and the ally swap places, the ally becomes the target of the attack instead. A lot of reactions have had wording clarifications and unifying languages. So a lot of reactions now have a trigger and a response, and it splits the reaction into those two things. So it tells you very specifically, here's what's going to trigger the reaction. Here is what the response to that trigger is going to be and when it's going to happen. That's just another nice little quality of life thing. And then in terms of the rest of its stat block, I think it's pretty much the same. A little bit of extra damage, similar to the lower goblin. If it has advantage, it gets some extra damage. But the most interesting thing for the goblin, I think, is the return of the goblin hexer. We last saw this in 4th edition. And there's a bunch of stuff that has been reintroduced into these revised 5th edition rules that have come from 4th edition. The bloodied condition, so creatures when they get to their half hit points get the bloodied condition. In of itself, it does nothing. It is a trigger for other conditions and status effects and all that good stuff. That was from 4th edition, and we're seeing a couple monsters kind of make their return from 4th edition, and I'm all for it. We're already losing the ability to speak. I'm all for it because 4th edition had some really cool stuff going on. So in terms of the goblin hexer, it's about what you'd expect. It's a spell casting goblin. It's CR3. It's got fairly low AC. It doesn't really have the ability through magic, through like innate spell casting, to up that AC, but it does have a bonus action that it can use, which seems like that is gonna be, I think that's a misprint. So the Goblin Hexer has listed a bonus action, which is Jinx, and it's the trigger. A creature the goblin can see hits it with an attack roll. The response is a wisdom saving throw with a DC of 13. The triggering creature, so the triggering creature has to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, the attack misses. That feels like it should be a reaction, but it's listed as a bonus action here on D&D Beyond. Pretty sure that's a typo, because that definitely feels like it should be a reaction, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to use it, and the reaction trigger kind of wording is reactions. So it does get some magic, some minor illusion, blindness, deafness, fairy fire, and grease. Pretty fine for low level goblin stuff, but not the most exciting stuff. I don't remember. I'm going to grab the 4th edition book so we can also look at that. So I'm going to grab that. Okay, so grab the 4th edition Monster Manual, because I think that we're going to come across a whole bunch of monsters when we're looking over this evening that first appeared in 4th edition, and I want to compare the 5th edition version of them to the 4th edition version, because I think that's going to be an interesting comparison. So goblins were page 135 in this bad boy. 135. So goblin soldiers, goblin warriors, goblin sharpshooters, goblin hexers. So let's have a looky-loo and see what they had. So they had a vexing cloud, which was an area burst, -2 to attack rolls for anyone within it. They had insight and bravery, so they used an immediate reaction when other goblins used goblin tactics. They also had the ability to shift the target from themselves to allies, just like the goblin boss can in 5th edition. And then they also had blinding and stinging hexes, which were specific ranged spells as well. So a little bit more going on in the 4th edition Goblin Hexer. They're very similar in terms of a lot of the other stuff that's going on. They're basically the same hit points. The 4th edition one had higher AC, but then a lot of the rest of it was broadly similar. So I'm going to keep the 4th edition book handy, because I feel like we're going to run into a couple of other monsters through the evening that we're going to want to check out. So if you've got any specific monsters that you want to see talked about, post them in the chat and we will have a look at them. So let's go back to the broad list of monsters, and let's do something much higher CR. Let's do a beholder. Let's do one of the more classic, kind of iconic monsters from D&D's history, and check out what the changes are to beholders. I was looking at this before and it's pretty spicy. So let me fire up the revised beholder. So the biggest thing with the 2014 beholder is the interaction between its anti-magic cone and its eye rays. So the anti-magic cone, the central eye of the beholder. Central eye, anything that it looks at is hit with the anti-magic field. Magic doesn't work. That anti-magic field also applies to the eye rays of the beholder. In the 2014 version, these two things overlapped, so quite often the beholder would look at something but then couldn't attack those things that it was looking at unless it chose not to use its anti-magic cone. So it had to choose to be suboptimal to be able to use its eye rays on a lot of things. That has changed in the 2024-25, the new version of the beholder, and the anti-magic cone has become a bonus action. So bonus action, anti-magic cone, the beholder's central eye emits an anti-magic wave in a 150-foot cone. Until the start of the beholder's next turn, the area acts as an anti-magic field spell, and that area works against the beholder's own eye rays. So that's broadly the same, but the way that it works in terms of the action economy has changed, and that means that it no longer is going to be turning off its own eye rays all the time. So beholder's turn starts, fire off all your eye rays, then use your anti-magic glare, which will turn off all magic until the start of your next turn. It will impact any legendary action eye rays the beholder wants to do, but it's not going to impact the eye rays that you want to use on your turn. So it has a minor impact in terms of in the first couple rounds when the players are more likely to be further away from the beholder and you want to be using all of those legendary actions on eye rays, it might have an impact, and you might decide either not to use the anti-magic cone or to specifically try and like split, so you've always got some players that are outside of it to target with the eye rays. But once you get into the later stages of a combat, especially once the marshals get in range, the new beholder has a legendary action called Chomp that allows it to make 2 bite attacks for 1 legendary action. So if there is a creature next to it, that is almost always going to be the best thing to do, because the Chomp is pretty decent in terms of damage. It's 13 damage per bite attack. You get to make 2 of them for a single legendary action, so it puts it on par with the kind of damage that you're doing from the eye rays. So once you've anti-magicked everything, which I believe still impacts on like your magic items and stuff. Let's double check. An aura of anti-magic surrounds you in a 10-foot emanation. No one can cast spells, take a magic action, or create magical effects inside the aura, and those things can't target or otherwise affect anything inside it. Magical properties of magic items don't work inside the aura or anything inside it. So that's still a huge problem for players. If they can't position themselves to get out of the eye rays aura, the anti-magic aura, that cone, and you charge at the beholder, and it looks at you and turns off not only your magic but all of your magic items, especially at higher level play, a lot of martial characters are going to really suffer from that as well, because all of their magic weapons are going to suddenly become just sticks. All of their magical armor, their cloaks of protection, all their fancy rings, all of these things aren't going to work. The magical properties of magic items don't work inside the aura. I'm pretty sure that includes potions. I haven't seen anything suggesting that wouldn't be the case. I would definitely rule that potions wouldn't work while you're in an anti-magic field. So even martials are going to be really impacted by this because of the kind of tier at which you're playing. And now that you can still fire off the eye rays during the beholder's turn and not be affected by this, beholders are much more powerful than they used to be. Not just that, but if we have a look at the beholder in 2014, all of its eye rays, most of its eye rays are pretty basic, and only a couple of them do any kind of damage. So the Innovation Ray does 36 damage, and then Disintegration and Death Ray do damage. In the new beholder, far more of its eye rays do damage. So Charm Ray does damage, Fear Ray does damage, Slowing Ray does damage, Innovation Ray does damage, Telekinetic Ray also does damage, I think. No, Telekinetic Ray does not. Petrification Ray does not. Disintegration Ray does, and Death Ray does. So I think like 7 of them. Let me just recount that. Charm, Paralyzing, no, Charm, Fear, Slowing, Innovation, Disintegration, and Death Ray. Yeah. Just a bunch more damage being popped off by the rays, in addition to the conditions that it pumps out when it's using those rays, which means that not only is it going to be able to use its rays way more frequently than it could in 2014, it's going to be able to do more damage per round on average. It gets more legendary actions, so it gets 4 legendary actions when it's in its lair. It also gets legendary resistances, which I don't believe it did in 2014. No, it didn't. So now it gets 3 legendary resistances, or 4 a day if it's in its lair. And why wouldn't you be fighting the beholder in its lair? Which means it's way more hardy. It's got a little bit more health, 190 versus the 180 it had in 2014. And it's a little bit more maneuverable. Regular speed of 5 feet instead of 0, and a 40 feet fly speed instead of 20 feet fly speed. So it can move around a whole bunch more, and I think its saves might actually be juiced as well. Yes, its saving throws across the board are either the same or higher. And that's something that I've noticed kind of across the board with higher level monsters as well, is that a lot of them have had saving throw buffs flat out across the board, where in 2014, like the beholder, for example, has a strength has no strength save, so it's just flat 0 for strength save. Now it's had a massive strength bump from 10 up to 16, so it gets a +3 on its strength save. Even though it's not necessarily proficient in that, it's still getting a positive save. And that's happened to a lot of the higher level monsters, is they've had buffs to their saving throws and also to their initiative. So the beholder's previous initiative was +2, because it only had a dex of +2, whereas it's now 12. So a lot of the higher level monsters, there's a very good chance they go in first. There's some in here that have got like 18, 19 initiative, which is just bananas, which again means that there's a better chance that they're going to get to do stuff before they start taking huge amounts of damage, which when you're fielding monsters as solo creatures, which I know, like, the common wisdom is always, oh, don't field monsters as solo creatures. It can definitely be done. You just have to be much more careful in how you do it. I think it's going to be easier than ever to field solo monsters. Like, I'm pretty confident I could field this new beholder as a solo monster and give the players a genuine challenge between its resistances, legendary action, and then the new makeup of its different abilities and its IRAs and things. And just generally super jazzed to see all of these new monsters. The only one that I've seen so far, and I think that it might actually be worth talking about, is the Assassin. Is that how you spell assassin? No, it is not. Assassin is the only one that I've seen from my browsing so far that has had what I would consider to be like a straight up downgrade for the most part. So the 2014 Assassin got a couple of traits that made it really interesting to use. It got the Assassinate trait, so it got advantage on attack rolls against any creature that hadn't taken its first turn, and any attacks against a surprise creature were crits. And then it got Sneak Attack, so it did extra damage when it has advantage. I really liked that. Made sense for what is essentially the higher level version of the NPC rogue. The new Assassin does not have that. It keeps evasion, so as expected, I would be flabbergasted had it lost evasion. It gets cunning action, so it gets to use dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action. That is nice. But then it's got nothing in the way of sneak attack. So its short sword in 2014 did 6 damage, and they had to take a con save or take 24 poison damage. The new version of the Assassin, they do 7 damage and 17 poison damage, and they get the poisoned condition. So they automatically grant poisoned onto the enemy. That's not nothing, and it is, it's a nice feature. A lot of new monsters don't require you to roll as the GM to impart conditions on the players. We're going to circle back to that because I think that might be one of the biggest changes to this monster manual, and something that we see. I have not seen a lot of complaints about it yet, and I expect that once we start seeing these monsters in play that we will. But the new Assassin doesn't do heaps more meaningful damage, but it feels less like an Assassin because it doesn't get the Assassinate feature and it doesn't get the sneak attack, and it's a weird choice. It is simpler to run for sure, but it is much less flavorful than the 2014 version. And circling back, I want to talk about the conditions and the automatically imparting conditions in the new book, because that is something that I think we are going to see a lot of people complain about in the coming months once they start running through these monsters. Up until this point, we've had the PHP, the DMG, we've had a lot of people playing with the characters from 2024, which are stronger, but fighting monsters from a decade ago. So their characters have been even more powerful than they've ever been. So it all feels amazing. Monsters have had a real glow up in this book, and a lot of it is in ways that I think is going to really annoy a lot of players. So using the Assassin as an example, the new Assassin automatically imparts the poisoned condition on a creature if they hit them. across the board, there's so many monsters that this is the case for. If they hit with their attack, they automatically impart some kind of condition. This might range from wolves automatically knocking creatures prone. This is something that I did see discussed quite a lot when the wolf stat block was shown off as part of the PHB. But that kind of convention of automatically assigning a condition if the creature hits is everywhere in this book, and some monsters create absolutely bananas combinations by doing it. One example is the Mind Flayer. Let's talk about the Mind Flayer, because the new Mind Flayers are scary. So old Mind Flayers, CR7. I've always found the Mind Flayer to be terrifying in the lore, and I think that I've always done a good job in my campaigns of building Mind Flayers up to be a terrifying threat, such that there are only 2 creature types that my players have ever run from on site. One of them is a homebrew monster called the Void Screamer, and the other is Mind Flayers. If I drop a Mind Flayer in front of my players, the good chances that they are running. But I don't think that the 5th edition version of Mind Flayers actually lives up to the threat that I've built them up to be. Or it didn't anyway. So 2014 versions of Mind Flayers, the tentacle attacked. You had to hit the creature. If they're medium or smaller, they're grappled. That's all fine. And then they had to succeed a DC 15 intelligence save or be stunned until the grapple ends. The new version of the Mind Flayer, if you hit the creature, they are both grappled and they are stunned. No save for the stunned, just if they are grappled, they are also stunned. And for as long as they are stunned, they are grappled. And then, similarly to 2014, they get a separate action that is the Extract Brain, which instead of being a melee weapon attack, as it is in 2014, it is now a Constitution save. So they make a Constitution save. One creature that is grappled by the Mind Flayer's tentacles, and on a failure, they take 10d10 piercing damage, and on success, they take half damage. Regardless of failure or success, if they are reduced to 0 hit points, they are killed, and the Mind Flayer devours their brain. So the fact that the Mind Flayer can, if they hit with that tentacle attack, auto grapples and auto stuns, makes it so that if the Mind Flayer grapples you and stuns you, there's a really good chance it's going to take your brain, especially given that 55 damage 10d10 is actually quite a lot for the CR that you're operating at, the CR7 Mind Flayer. So chances are you're going to be running into this thing top of tier 1, bottom of tier 2. If you've been going through your adventuring day for a little bit, already taking a little bit of damage, if you're in a fight with a Mind Flayer and some cronies, and the mobs have damaged you a little bit, there's a really decent chance that a Mind Flayer could get in there and one-shot someone in a only mildly unfortunate fight. And I think that is just incredible. Just incredible. Not just that, but they have the new Mind Flayer has the Mind Blast, just like the old one. So in the old one, they emit psychic energy in a 60-foot cone. Every creature in the area must succeed a DC 15 intelligence save or take a bunch of psychic damage and be stunned. Creature can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of their turns. That's pretty much exactly the same, except for they are stunned until the end of the Mind Flayer's next turn. And they don't get to repeat the save. They don't save on their turn. So the stun condition from Mind Blast lasts a much shorter amount of time. So on the surface of it, you're like, cool, awesome. That's awesome. It lasts a shorter amount of time. But you don't get to save on it on your turn like you used to be able to. So if the Mind Flayer goes first and drops a mind blast as their opening salvo and manages to catch several party members in it and stun them, then they will be just out of the action until the end of the mind flayer's next turn. So on the mind flayer's next turn, it's got all of the time in the world to go and start doing what it needs to do. So they would be stunned, which means they're also incapacitated, which means that they... What does that mean? It gives no... What you get? I don't think you get advantage against stunned creatures, do you? No, you do. Attack rolls against you have advantage. So, round 1, Mind Blast. Round 2, Mind Flayer slithers in. Advantage on its tentacle attack to attack you. And then you're grappled. And then you are still stunned until the end of your turn. And then you're grappled, so you are also stunned because of the grapple. And then... I don't even know when you would remake that check. Let's have a look at the stunned condition. While you're stunned, you are incapacitated. Saving throws, you automatically fail strength and dex-based saving throws, which is the grapple. And then incapacitated. So yeah, I think if a mind flayer can get off a successful mind blast in the first turn and stun a couple people, and they've already taken some damage and aren't full on the tank, there's a really strong chance that mind flayer is taking someone's brain and killing them, and that makes them so good, so good, and I love that. And then they just use their once a day plane shift ability, eat someone's brain, be like, cool, I'm dead now, I'm full, plane shift out of there, don't even fight the rest of the party. What a way to lose a character that would be, to just get your brain eaten and then your friends don't even get to give retribution against the creature that did you in because it's just gone on a different plane. And that level of like nastiness in the monsters is definitely what I want to see. Honestly, like, I want to see monsters that instill fear, because I think that for the last decade we've gotten too used to like the expectation of victory and the expectation of the players feeling like superheroes and being powerful enough that it's very rare that the party will come across something that is truly terrifying. And I think because of a lot of these rider abilities that a lot of monsters get now that just happen, players are going to have to be much more cautious about getting in there with a lot of monsters, because a lot of these monsters have abilities that rely on them being in like touch range of the players. Even like spell casting monsters, there are some creatures that you wouldn't expect to be like creatures that are up in your face, but that if you get near to them, they have like a surprise little, I might not hit you because you might have too high AC, but if I hit you, I'm going to stack a bunch of conditions on you and you're about to have a really bad time. And I love that. Again, anyone have any suggestions for monsters they want me to talk about, the changes to the monsters in the 2024-25, the new monster book? And we will look at some of the specific ones. Whilst you are thinking about monsters that you might like to see, I will try and figure out my tabs, because I've got 8 million tabs going on and they are all confusing me. Oh, that's not the one I want. Is that the one I want? That's not the one I want. That's the one I want. This is the problem with having the two instances of D&D Beyond that look almost exactly the same. Really hard to figure out which one's which. So let's see whether I can find something that's completely brand new and talk about some of the brand new stuff. I think there's been some brand new vampire stuff, I think. Let's have a look. Are there creature abilities that are best for range, therefore mixing ones that thrive on melee contacts and ones that thrive on range, making players having to realize which strat works best? There are, I think, a lot of creatures that previously didn't have ranged abilities have been given ranged. So let's, for funsies, have that. I can never spell it. Let's, for funsies, have a look at the Tarask, because the Tarask is, I think, one of the best examples of a monster that should have been terrifying, but because in part it had a lack of ranged abilities, it really fell short of the mark in 2014. And the Tarask has had a lot of glow ups in the new Monster Manual, which I really, really like. So it's broadly the same in terms of defenses. Well, it's kind of the same in terms of defenses. AC is still 25. Hit points have been bumped to 697, so a little bit of an increase. Its speed has been increased to 60, which is surprisingly fast for something that large. But it's also gained a burrow speed, which is incredible, and a climb speed. The climb speed is fine, it's whatever, allowing it to climb over the obstacles that it would otherwise tear through. That's kind of nice. But the burrow speed means that at the end of its turn, it can just burrow underground where it can't be shot unless you go and fly down the hole and go after it. So that's one way that it can avoid kind of ranged attacks. Previously, it was immune to fire and poison, which it still is, and bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. That whole immunity to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks is just gone from the game. Now, the Tarask is resistant to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from any source, so whether it's magical or not, which means martial characters just across the board are going to have much harder time fighting the Tarask. If you are like the classic example of dealing with a Tarask is you cast fly, or you get some form of fly that allows you to get above the Tarask, and you get a bunch of longbows and you just shoot at it until it's dead. Cool. Well, now the range of the longbow is the range of the longbow, I believe. Let's have a look. Range of the longbow is 150 feet. So when attacking beyond the normal range. So yeah, they've been very clever in the way that they've designed the new Tarask's abilities. So the range of the longbow is 150 feet, and they've made it so that it has a 150 foot ranged attack that works on a recharge. So if you don't want disadvantage against the Tarask, you have to be close enough that it can strike you back. That's one of the ways that they're kind of getting around this. The second is that now it just has flat resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing, as everything that has that ability does. There's no non-magical. That rider is gone. So if you're shooting it with arrows, you're only doing half damage, so that 697 health becomes like 1394 or whatever it is. And it also, the new Tarask gets an ability called Thunderous Bellow, which recharges on a 5 or a 6. So you're going to get maybe 2 uses of this in a 6-round combat. It's a con save with a DC of 27, which is major threat for your wizards. And that's specifically, I think that's a specific intent. And we'll circle back to that in a second. But each creature and each object that isn't being worn or carried within a 150 foot cone If they fail, they take 12d12 thunder damage, and they are deafened and frightened until the end of their next turn. Then on a success, they only take half damage. So they're taking damage regardless. But it being a Constitution saving throw and it being so high means wizards are almost certainly failing. Spellcasters, other than sorcerers, are almost certainly failing that. So the creatures that allow you to stay at range and that really dictate like the control of a Tarask battle are the ones that are going to really suffer from that. And yeah, 78 damage isn't going to kill them outright, but it's going to do a lot. It's going to make it so that you take a big chunk out of them straight away, and then they're deafened and frightened so that they can't move any closer to you. Gives you a little bit of control in that sense. Also gives them some disadvantages. And then another thing that I really like about the new Tarask is there's been a minor tweak to its swallow ability. So it could swallow in 2014, as a lot of creatures could, and when a creature was swallowed, it would be blinded, restrained, have total cover, take some damage. If you did enough damage while you were inside it, it would regurgitate you. All of that is broadly the same. Some numbers have tweaked, but that's not what's really interesting. What I find really interesting is now when you are grappled or swallowed by the Tarask, you cannot teleport, which is brand new. I can't think of any creature before off the top of my head that did this. So both the bite attack, which grapples you, so if it hits you, you are grappled, and then, until the grapple ends, you are restrained and you can't teleport. And then the swallow, which means that whilst you are swallowed, you cannot teleport. I love this kind of through line of it means that you can't just misty step away from the creature, and it broadens this idea that the Tarask is this anti-magic creature, this primordial force that just rejects magic. So it still has its magical resistance, so it still gets advantage on saving throws against magic spells and magic effects. And it also still has its reflective carapace with a slight tweak. So it still reflects magic missiles, other spells that require a ranged attack roll, but not line spells like it used to. So it's slightly worse in that sense. But this no teleportation if you are grappled or swallowed by the Tarask really reinforces that idea that this enormous primordial beast is like the anti-magic titan. And I wish they'd have gone further with that. I wish that it could have had some more options for like specifically anti-magic, like mage killer stuff. Like I wish that its thunderous bellow was kind of like an anti-magic field, or that it had like some kind of action that did like an anti-magic field, because it has a legendary action called World Shaking Movement, where it moves up to its speed, and then at the end of its movement it creates a shockwave, a 60-foot emanation, and creatures in that area lose concentration, no save, which is enormous, and if they're medium or small they have the prone condition, and then the Tarask can't do that again until the next turn. But functionally the Tarask can like just walk up to something, stomp, and turn its magic off. I just wish the flavor of the writing was slightly different. But breaking concentration without any kind of save, again, I've never seen that on a monster, and that's the kind of power that I want to see from a CR30 thing. I want to see it doing stuff that nothing else is, and I want to see it like breaking the rules in those kind of ways. It's really cool. I really like the no teleportation out of it, and I really like that it can just break concentration if it stomps up to you. It's something that I feel like I would want to telegraph that to the players, or would want to tell them, because if you've played 5e for a decade, the first time that happened to you, you would feel really bad. So I feel like even if I didn't necessarily tell them about this coming from the specific creature up front, I might want to, at the start of a campaign, be like, look, we're playing using the revised rules. Here's a broad overview of sort of the way that monsters at a high level are really different. They will automatically impart conditions. Some of them can just break your concentration. That is just how the game works now. We need to be okay with it, just to start priming them to get ready for that fight so that it doesn't completely slap them in the face unawares. But broadly, very cool. New Trask, way more scary. Plus, it's got a plus 18 initiative versus the 0 that it had before, so it actually might get a chance to go before the players. Wild. Bob says, I can understand that the non-teleport for something like the Trask is the effect of other creatures that swallow, like the purple worm. Let's have a look at the new purple worm, because I've not looked at it. So let's see. Purple worm. Purpley wormy. So purple worm could previously bite. So it was a bite. If it was larger or smaller, it had to do a dex save or be swallowed at the time of biting. Now the bite is a part of the action that imparts the grappled condition. They are restrained until the grapple ends, and then the swallow element of it is a bonus action. So they're slightly worse in that sense, but I don't think, the purple worm had no bonus actions before, so it's not losing out in the action economy in that way. Strength saving throw, DC 19, larger or smaller creature that's grappled by the worm, and it can have up to 3 creatures swallowed at a time. Failure, they're swallowed by the worm. The grappled condition ends. They are blinded and restrained. Total cover, they take damage. If the worm takes a certain amount of damage, yada yada yada, it regurgitates them. If it dies, they are no longer restrained and can escape from the corpse using 20 feet of movement. No, there is no condition about teleportation from inside the purple worm. So I think that teleportation, kind of the lockdown of the teleportation, is specific to the Trask or other like anti-magical thing, which is really cool. Purple worm is broadly the same though. 18 armor class, 247 hit points, exactly the same as it used to be. Its dex is the same, but it's now got a +3 to its initiative, so it has gotten a little bit better. It still has its tunneler ability. It still has its bite and swallow and a tail stinger, but the swallow has been split out into a bonus action. So still pretty much the same, and it can burrow 50 feet instead of 30. So for a CR 15 creature, that's actually a really modest change. I would have expected more. Honestly, I would have expected a lot more, especially given that the purple worm is like an iconic part of D&D, and coming off several years of like Dune mania, I would have expected them to beef the purple worm in some way, or add something to give that effect of being able to like burrow attack or something along those lines. I would have expected more from the purple worm, but it stayed remarkably similar, which I am surprised by. Let's have a look at vampires, because who doesn't love vampires? So in 2014 we got the vampire spawn, and the vampire spellcaster, and the vampire warrior. In 2024 we get the vampire familiar, then the regular vampire, the vampire nightbringer, the vampire spawn makes a return, and then we get the vampire umbral lord, which is the higher version of the vampire CR15 instead of CR13. Honestly, I would like the umbral lord to have been a bit higher CR. A jump from CR13 up to CR15 doesn't seem like a lot, especially given that the Umbral Lord sounds, like a really impressive thing. Let's have a look and see whether vampire... I can't remember whether Vampire Lord was a thing previously. No, it was not. I thought it was. That's fine. Let's start with the basic vampire and see how that has changed. So, our CR13 vampire. Its HP has been bumped to 195 instead of 144. So, like with most creatures, it has had a modest bump in HP. This is because it's lost that resistance to damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. Now it just has resistance to necrotic damage. That's the only thing it gets in terms of resistances. And then it gets its vampire weaknesses, so it's still vulnerable to daylight, running water, has forbiddances, and the state of the heart will cause it to become incapacitated. It can still spider climb. It can still misty escape. It gets 3 legendary resistances, 4 if it's in its lair. And then in terms of actions, so 2014 it made 2 attacks, only one of which can be a bite, and now it gets 2 grave strikes and a bite, so it's upping its action economy a little bit. So the unarmed strike in 2014 was 8 damage, and instead of dealing the damage, it could grapple. Really weak source. Now it does 8 damage and 7 necrotic damage, and if they're large or smaller, they have the grappled condition. So it does almost twice as much damage, and they get to be grappled without having to exchange that. So the strikes from the vampire are like 3 times as good as they were, and it can still make 2 of them and still bite. The bite is it's gone down a little bit in damage, so it's only 6 piercing damage instead of 7, but the necrotic damage has been upped to 13, and then the target's hit points decreased by that amount, and the vampire regains that amount, pretty much the same as before, and has the vampire spawn creation like it did before. New vampire gets a whole bunch of bonus actions as well, so shape shifting becomes a bonus action, so shape changer becomes a bonus action instead of a full action as it was in the traits section before. So it can shapeshift into a bat or a medium cloud of mist and then return into its vampire form. So that's broadly the same as it was in 2014, just better action economy for it. And then it also gets a bonus action charm, which is recharged on a 5 or 6. So it casts charm person without any spell components, which is really nice. Welcome in, Devorgan. How are we? And then it gets 3 legendary actions or 4 legendary actions in its lair. Got 3 in 2014. It can no longer move. Oh no, it can. It can move up to half its speed and strike as part of one combined action. So doesn't need the move and strike. It can't bite as a legendary action anymore, but it can cast command as a legendary action. So it gets a little bit more in terms of spell casting than it did before. It is a little bit more resilient in terms of its hit points, and it's got slightly better action economy, but still not incredible, not what I would have wanted from the vampire. I still don't think it's amazing for the vampire. I think what is much more interesting for the vampire is what's going on with its lair, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let me scroll so I can compare them. Leather tie-dye. Oh, thank you. It's the Knuff hoodie from the Barbie movie. So in 2014, a lot of the monsters had monster lairs. Some of them got lair actions. Some of them got regional effects. A lot of that is broadly gone in the new Monster Manual and has been replaced either with actions that they just get in their stat block now, which I broadly like, but when they get information about their lair, even though it's split off from the stat block, a lot of it is much more interesting. So in 2014, the regional effects that affected a vampire's lair was there's a noticeable increase in the population of bats, rats, and wolves in the region. This is compared to the new version, which is the vampire exerts influence over animals in its domain. From dusk until dawn, medium or smaller beasts have the charmed condition while within 1 mile of the lair. So there's an actual specific mechanical benefit to a vampire lair now, whereas previously it was just, you just notice more bats, rats, and wolves. Plants within 500 feet of the lair wither and their stems and branches become twisted and thorny back in 2014. Shadows cast within 500 feet of the lair seem abnormally gaunt and sometimes move as though alive. This has been changed to the looming shadows feature, so shadows within 1 mile of the lair seem to move as if alive, and any creatures except the vampire and its allies that finish a short rest within 1 mile of the lair must succeed a DC 15 wisdom save or gain no benefit from the rest. So cool. I love that effect. The idea that you just cannot rest while you are close to the lair of the vampire. I think that's going to add a lot of tasty spice to Curse of Strahd campaigns. And then finally, the mist. So this was creeping fog that clings to the ground within 500 feet of the vampire's lair in 2014. Occasionally took eerie forms, grasping claws, writhing serpents, and that kind of stuff. Now, again, within 1 mile of the vampire's lair is lightly obscured by a persistent creeping fog. The vampire and any creatures of its choice are unaffected. So again, another mechanical, solid thing, which I really, really like. I hope that there's a lot more of that. I haven't read through enough of the monsters to know, but I hope a lot more of them have these like really specific mechanical lair kind of regional effects going on, because that looming shadow one, especially, like not being able to gain the benefit of rest unless you pass the saving throw, chef's kiss. Love that for a vampire's lair. Dev Walking says, random question, you mentioned Barbie, have you seen Wicked? I haven't seen it yet. It is on my list to see, but I've not seen it yet. And Lexisaurus says, damn, I'm late to the party. Welcome in. We're diving through the Monster Manual and looking at vampires at the minute. So let's have a look at another one of the vampires. Let's keep the vampire open and take a look at the new Vampire Umbral Lord. So this is the new CR15, the tippy top of the vampire crop as far as the Monster Manual is concerned. I do want to have a look at and see whether there is a stat block for Strahd. I think there is. I'm pretty sure there is. Strahd Bonzarovich, that's what I want. So Strahd is a CR15 creature. So this is the stat block that I want to compare. Because I think that if we're going to compare the cream of the vampire crop, Strahd is where we want to make our comparisons. Not that I'm saying I believe that the Strahd stat block is actually the cream of the vampire crop, but I think it's a good place to start. So our CR15 Strahd, Curse of Strahd spoilers, 144 hit points. Our Vampire Umbral Lord, 187, same AC. So we've got a bit of a bump there. Again, that comes from the resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damages from non-magical attacks just not being a thing in the new version of the Monster Manual. But then there is also the Umbral Lord gets immunity to necrotic, cold, and cold damage. So Strahd is only resistant to necrotic and not immune. Rough. He also isn't immune to charmed or exhaustion which the Umbral Lord is. So immediately, welcome in Agile Monk. It seems like a bunch of people didn't get the notification this evening. Good old YouTube, never notifying. So the Umbral Lord that's in the new Monster Manual, certainly in terms of resistances and immunities, seems to have a leg up on Strahd. It's immune to being charmed, immune to exhaustion, and has slightly better necrotic and cold immunities. And then we get the shape changer. That is broadly the same, I think. Shape changer. Is there a shape changer? There is not a shape changer in the Umbral Lord's listed abilities. They have shadowy escape, vampire weaknesses. That's weird. So the new vampire gets a shape change, right? I did say that. Yeah, shapeshift. It's a bonus action. That's bizarre. The Umbral Lord doesn't get a shape change. I am surprised by that. I'm surprised that you'd get a bump in CR but not maintain core abilities. Am I just reading this wrong? Let me read it. No, the Vampire Umbral Lord doesn't get a shape change. That is weird. That seems like a real big oversight, surely. And then legendary resistances. So Strahd got 3. Our Umbral Lord gets 3 or 4 if it's in its lair. It gets a shadowy escape, which is going to be similar to a misty escape, I imagine. 0 hit points outside of their coffin, 0 hit points outside of the resting place, 10 teleports. Yeah, it seems to be the shadowy escape is comparable to misty escape. Strahd gets regeneration, which the Umbral Lord does not get. Strahd gets spider climb, which the Umbral Lord does not get. This is very surprising. They get the same weaknesses, vampire weaknesses. Strahd also gets a couple of spells, a lot of spells. Strahd gets a lot of spells. And then multi-attack. The Umbral Lord uses Grave Strike and Sickening Ray. And then it also has a rechargeable Hunger of Hadar. Does Strahd have Hunger of Hadar? He does not. I actually think Strahd surprisingly comes out on top here. I was not expecting that at all. So we found our second instance where a new creature that's comparable, it's not exactly the same, doesn't hit in the same way. It's not one for one, it's not like for like, but Strahd is a vampire that is CR15 and the Vampire Umbral Lord is a vampire that's CR15. I think it's reasonable to compare them. It's nice that the Umbral Lord is immune to necrotic and to charmed and exhausted. I would probably take that and put that onto Strahd, because the idea of Strahd being charmed is kind of ridiculous. But beyond that, Strahd probably does come out on top here. Maybe the damage numbers. No, his damage numbers are higher. I think they are higher. Yeah, just Strahd all the way. Awesome. The Umbral Lord is really disappointing. Like, if you don't have access to Curse of Strahd, this would give you baby's first Curse of Strahd, like, but it's not nearly, like, I feel like the Umbral Lord probably should have just been the vampire, and they should have had like a CR17 monster that was the Vampire Umbral Lord that really juiced up the vampire, because this CR15 one is, at least on first read, like really weak source. Like really weak source. Disappointingly so. But let's have a look at the Vampire Nightbringer. That's the CR8 vampire that we've got. There's no equivalent version in the 2014 book. So this is a creature that is formed as part of like a ritual, and then They manipulate the shadows and feed off the raw life force of living creatures. So this is like your Morbius. It's Morbin time. AC 16, HP is 142. They're immune to cold and necrotic, charmed, exhausted, and frightened. They get the sunlight hypersensitivity like the others, and then they get a bite and a shadow strike, and then a bonus action stealth. That's kind of weak sauce for a CR8. I would expect a much more interesting stat block. Vampires are kind of a letdown in the new book. I'm not gonna lie. I like the vampire familiar. The new vampire familiar is quite nice. It's immune to charmed, resistant to necrotic. It's got like connections to the vampires, a nice little servant to go around. But I'm really quite disappointed in the vampires through the rest. I don't think that the CR13, the base vampire, is as different as I would have expected. That Umbral Lord is surprisingly weak source. Like, if you have access to Strahd, just use Strahd's stat block at that CR. And the Nightbringer is like born of necromantic rituals and planes of existence suffused with negative energy. Vampire Nightbringers manipulate shadows and feed on raw life force of living creatures. Cool, excellent description. Where's the manipulation of shadows in their stat block? Like, where is their ability to cast some kind of darkness? Where is their ability to drain the life force out of a creature? They can bite and regen their health in that way, like all vampires can. But beyond that, they can't drain the life force of a creature. They can deal some cold damage from their shadow strike, but they don't have the ability to manipulate shadows, which would be awesome. Like a vampire Nightbringer that could drop darknesses and summon up shadows would be super cool. But that is not what we get here. We just get another like bite, an arm strike vampire that's got less going on. And yeah, I really don't like that. I don't like that at all. The description does not match the rules for that at all. I need a palate cleanser after that. I need something that's gonna jazz me. I need a dragon. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at red dragons. Let's go for red, like a classic red dragon. Red dragon. Should we go ancient or adult? Let's go adult first and then see how we go. So 2014 adult red dragon, one of the most iconic monsters in all of D&D. It's one half of the name. We get an AC of 19 and 256 health. Interestingly, exactly the same in the new Monster Manual. That's fairly uncommon, I think, for a lot of the higher CR monsters. A lot of them got really large HP boosts previously. Still immune to fire, no other immunities or resistances, no vulnerabilities. Its saving throws have been bumped pretty significantly, I think. So let's have a look. Or maybe not. Oh no, its saving throws have been tanked. So 2014 it got a plus 13 to its Constitution saving throw. Now it only gets a plus 7. Oof. Plus 7 to its Wisdom, plus 11 to its Charisma. Still has the plus 7. Now only gets plus 6 to its Charisma. Instead, it has had what's been bumped to compensate. Its Dexterity has been bumped to compensate. The proficiency bonus has been moved over to Dexterity. It's got a plus 6 to its saving throw in Dexterity. Legendary resistances, again, 3 as of normal, 4 if it's in its lair. And then it gets the multi-attack. Its Bite Claw, Tail has all been replaced with just Rend. I'm a big fan of this because the differences, like doing the 3 different damage types, was worthwhile in like super edge cases in 2014, depending on how some creatures might have resistance. But given that that resistance doesn't really apply anymore most of the time, replacing it just with a rend that does some slashing damage and fire damage is really nice. It feels like quite a small amount of damage. It's still 3 attacks. It's doing 18 damage on a rend. And then it can still use fire breath, which does 59 damage, so 17d6. So that's dropped down a little bit. And then it also has some spellcasting baked in now. So it's got Command, the level 2 version, Detect Magic, Scorching Ray, and it can cast Fireball. Why you would want to cast Fireball instead of doing the Fire Breath? I suppose if the Fire Breath is on cooldown, but I would rather, like, it's a once a day thing. If you're assuming the monster's going to live for 6 rounds, it's going to recharge that twice. So just make it recharge on a 4 to 6 instead of a 5 to 6 and drop Fireball and give me other things, or make the breath weapon recharge on a 6 and give me like Flame Strike maybe. I don't know. And then it's got a Commanding Presence legendary action in the new Monster Manual, so it uses spellcasting to cast command. It's also got Fiery Rays, so it can Scorching Ray as a legendary action, and it can move half its speed and make 1 rend attack as a legendary action. It's lost its Frightful Presence, which I think is a real shame. Like, a real shame. Because that was one of the defining features of dragons, in my eyes, was the Frightful Presences. And I don't think that the Commanding Presence makes up for it. The command is fine. Let's have a look at what the level 2. So it can target 2 creatures with command. And its DC is... Oh, you're not going to tell me it's DC, are you? God damn it. Oh, DC 20. Cool. So DC 20 is pretty nice. The wisdom save. Certainly the fighters and barbarians, the dumb himbos in the party are going to struggle with that. And commanding 2 creatures per turn to either approach or drop or flee is like quite nice. But I would like to have seen something more akin to the aura that we had in 2014, because those auras were really nice. I would also like to have seen something similar to a lot of the elementals get like the ability to like deal fire damage to things that attack this creature. It's like CR 17, and I don't feel like it's hitting. It doesn't feel impressive for CR 17. Adrian Monk says, honestly, I'm fairly disappointed in the Monster Manual overall based on what I've now seen and reviewed. I've been broadly impressed with it. The further we go, the more stat blocks I find that I'm less jazzed on. But I found more that I've been really impressed with than have not so far. But there are like 500 in there, and it's been out for like 5 hours, so there's no way that I've seen them all. But I like a lot of the direction it's moving. Time will tell on how I feel about it overall, and can always either use the older versions or default to like homebrew versions. Plus, if I'm underwhelmed with the versions that are present in this Monster Manual, provided they do release an SRD as they have promised, it just gives me an excuse to do my Reforged series again in SideQuest and remake all of the 2025 monsters how I would like to have made them. I'm definitely going to be doing that for vampires again, because those vampires really disappointed me, and I can see in my mind how I would have done them, especially with like Robert Edgar's Nosferatu influences and the Command of Shadows. Like, Nosferatu is still burned into my brain, so I will definitely be doing some more vampire monsters in SideQuest very soon. Jesse says some PCs in my group don't have to worry about their brains being taken. -3 intelligence. Yeah, and like that's gonna never be a problem for some. Like, intellect devourers come past them, just keep on walking. That's a good point. We can look at intellect devourers. Devour. Oh, it's gonna be American, isn't it? Oh no, it kept it. Devourer. Intellect devourer. That is not correct. There we go. Intellect devourer. Let's have a look at intellect devourer. So they were CR2. They are still CR2. Tiny little HP bump, 28 up from 21. The initiatives stayed the same. The saves, the first modern stat block I've seen that has actual minuses on its stat block. That's incredible. They are now only resistant to psychic damage, so they've lost that bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks, as all monsters have, and they have only received a tiny bump to their HP to accommodate that. I think probably because Intellect Devourers are one of those monsters that probably hit above their CR previously, like Shadows. Shadows should be the next monster we look at. Detect Sentience was the old ability. They can detect the presence and location of any creature within 300 feet that has an intelligence of 3 or higher, regardless of interposing barriers, and then unless they're protected by the Mind Blank spell. Now, they magically sense the location of any creature within 300 feet of itself with an intelligence score of 3 or higher, regardless of interposing barriers. Nothing about the Mind Blank spell. So Mind Blank just won't protect you from Intellect Devourers. Interesting addition, because it previously made you immune to psychic damage and anything that would sense devotion, charmed condition, and even foils wish. So Mind Blank is incredible. And it's an 8th level spell. So that 8th level spell would protect you against an Intellect Devourer in 2014. And now it does not. So I can see a world where there might be some story element of being able to use like enthralled Intellect Devourers or like caged Intellect Devourers to like try and see whether someone's casting Mind Blank or like interacting between that, something like that. There's something there with that removal that I kind of like, because Mind Blank has come up a couple times in my campaign. Carver says, I've heard a lot of talk about force damage being super common now, but it doesn't seem that way for monsters below CR20. I've not seen a lot of force damage yet, but again, there's so many monsters in the new book that I've still only managed to look at such a tiny slice of them. I think force damage is more common from what I've heard from other folks who've had it, but again, only managed to look at a tiny slice so far. So previously, the Intellect Devourer got to make a multi-attack, one attack with its claws, and use Devour Intellect. It's the same now. The claw does exactly the same damage. The Devour Intellect, 10 feet of it that has a brain, DC 12 intelligence saving throw, will take 11 damage. Now it's just one creature they can see within 5 feet. They take 11 damage and they have a stunned condition until the Devourer's next turn. So it doesn't change your intelligence score anymore, but it does just stun you. So if you fail, you take psychic damage and you are stunned, but it doesn't change your intelligence score. I don't know how I feel about that. I think that is probably Short term, that probably makes them better. Being able to more reliably stun, not having it be the DC's the same, they take the same amount of damage, they get the stun. But there's something about reducing the intelligence score to 0. Like, it's such a classic D&D element, and losing that feels like losing the reduction of a score to 0 feels like losing a part of D&D's history. It's like a really minor thing, because really speaking, very few people would have long-term suffered from this. So making it so that you are just stunned until the Intellect Devourer's next turn is fine, but Intelligence 0 is such a meme. Like, it's so funny when a dumb himbo barbarian gets their intelligence set to 0 by this walking brain. I will miss that. But it still keeps the stealing of the body. So it initiates an intelligence context with an incapacitated humanoid within 5 feet that isn't protected by protection from evil and good. If it wins the contest, the devourer magically consumes the target's brain, teleports into the skull, and takes control of the body. While inside, has total cover, yada yada yada. Gains its entire yada 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 yada. If the host body dies, you must leave it. How's the new one work? Same DC, I believe. Is 3 for the DC? I don't even think it says how you do it in the old one. It's now a DC 12 intelligence saving throw to steal the body. One small or medium creature within 5 feet that has the incapacitated condition, so it will stun them. And then they have to be a humanoid or a beast, and they have to have 10 hit points or fewer. Interesting. They possess the target, consuming the brain, teleport inside the skull. While there, they have total cover. They keep their stuff. Otherwise, they adopt the game statistics of the target creature. They know everything it knew, including spells and languages. Body dies, they must leave. And if they're forced out, or Intellect Devour is also forced out if the target regains its devoured brain by means of a wish spell. By spending 5 feet of its movement, they can voluntarily leave the body, teleport to the nearest unoccupied space within 5 feet. The body then dies unless the brain is restored at the end of the Intellect Devourer's next turn. That's fine. I do think missing the drop to 0 hit points is a shame. And it makes me worried for what the new shadow is going to look like and whether it's going to reduce the shadow strength. So previously the shadow had the shadow drain. If the target died, it would reduce your strength by 1d4. You die if your strength got dropped down to 0. That is mercifully the same. So decreases your strength fall by 1d4. They die if they drop to 0. And if they're a humanoid, they rise as a shadow 1d4 hours later. Something that is interesting, though, is previously it said, otherwise this reduction lasts until the target finishes a short or long rest, the reduction to your strength score. That is just gone now. So I have no idea how you recover your strength score if it is lowered. And there's a number of things like that previously would affect you until you finished a long rest within a monster stat block that now do not. And I don't know whether this is laid out somewhere else in one of the other rule books or whether it is just a case of now the new Shadows Drain and Strike, it will just reduce your strength score forever. So let's have a look at like remove curse, because that feels like remove curse and restoration. Those feel like the two that it's going to be. Remove curse and greater or lesser restoration. If it's going to be in a spell, it'll be in one of those two. All curses Right, so it's not going to be in Remove Curse. It's not in Lesser Restoration. Greater Restoration. It has to be Greater Restoration then. So if you are hit by a shadow now, your strength is drained until you are targeted by a Greater Restoration spell. So shadows got much stronger. That is not what I was expecting. Holy shitballs. So they're still CR1 half. Their AC is still 12. They got a hit point bump up to 27 because they lost the resistance to non-magical damage. They're still resistant to like all of the other elemental damage, and they have immunity to necrotic and poison and a whole bunch of conditions. Exhaustion, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poisoned, prone, restrained, unconscious. And they have kept their amorphous, they've kept their sunlight weakness, they've kept their shadow stealth, which has been shunted to the dedicated bonus action section. But that draining swipe, which was the strength drain, has been changed so that you just get a strength decrease of 1d4 and you die if it's reduced to 0. And as far as I can tell, the only way to get that back is Greater Restoration. And that's incredible. I love that. It makes me doubly... That actually explains why the Intellect Devourer doesn't take you to 0 intelligence. Because you'd just be 0 intelligence forever until you got Greater Restoration. And they're only like CR2, so you could fight them like super early on. And Greater Restoration's a level 5 spell. So you could have 0 intelligence and just be a blubbering mess for like half your campaign. Okay, I'll give them a pass on reducing your intelligence to 0. I do think they should have taken the shadow approach and had it reduce your intelligence by 1d4 though. That would have been hilarious, and I might do that for homebrew Intellect Devourers, because why not? But losing your intelligence for an Intellect Devourer is just part of it. Like the stunned, yeah, cool. The transference of the brain, I've never seen it actually happen in game, but the losing your intelligence is like part of what you remember from fighting an Intellect Devourer. It's like, oh, these really annoying brains that sucked my intelligence out. So I think they should have gone decrease it by 1d4. I think that would have been much funnier. And I make 90% of my GM decisions on the lols. But I cannot believe shadows have been improved. Like, that is wild. I was really expecting them to get a nerf because they already punch well above their weight. And now that the reduction in strength lasts just forever until you get hit by a Greater Restoration. Incredible. I'm going to use so many shadows. My players are going to hate me. Like, Curse of Strahd campaigns are looking real spicy right now. Let's have a look at some other... Let's look at just some general undead. Going for the Strahd vibe. Let's clear off shadow and filter out undead. And I have no idea why that has... There we go. No idea why the screen did that. Weird. So, let's have a look. Banshees. Banshees are always fun. So, immediately they have fewer hit points. Always surprised to see in the new Monster Manual. Their saves are broadly the same. -5 on the strength, +2 on the dex, nothing on con, +1 on intelligence, and then +2 and +3 on charisma. So they've got worse on the charisma save, and they've got better on... No, they've not got better on dex saves. They've just had a little bit of a nerf there as well. They are still resistant to a whole bunch of stuff, but not, again, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical attacks. I'll say it until I'm hoarse. Excuse me, that is gone from the new rules. And they're immune to absolutely tons of conditions, just like they were in 2014. They can still detect life. They still have incorporeal movement. And let's have a look at Horrify. So previously, that was a DC 13 saving throw. That's still the same. Still 60 feet. And on a failure, the target has the frightened condition until the start of the Banshee's next turn. And on a success, they're immune for 24 hours. In 2014, it was frightened for a minute. And then they can repeat every turn. So not quite as good for Horrifying Visage. So it's something that you're going to have to keep up each turn. If a character fails, they're only going to be frightened until the start of the Banshee's next turn, at which point they'll stop being frightened. And if you want to frighten them again, you have to horrify them again. I'm not a massive fan of that. I think it simplifies things in terms of remembering stuff, because you can just say, you're frightened until next turn. We don't have to track this for the next minute of combat. It makes it simpler in that sense, but it makes the Banshee's action economy much, much worse. And the Corrupting Touch does way less damage. So it did 12 necrotic damage in 2014. It now only does 7. And it's Deathly Wail. Mournful Wail, she's not in sunlight. No effect on constructs and undead. All creatures within 30 feet of her. DC 13 con save. On a fail, they drop to 0 hit points. On a success, they take 10 psychic damage. In the new version, on a fail, if they have 25 hit points or fewer, they drop to 0 hit points. So again, worse than it was in 2014. Otherwise, they take 10 psychic damage. So the Banshee is another creature that I think has gotten worse than it was in 2014. It's less applicable at higher levels. Yeah, the DC 13 con save meant it probably wasn't going to be useful at a higher level. But there's always the chance that something like a wizard is going to fail that con save, because wizards are really squishy. And throwing a Banshee amongst a big mix of undead for a higher level fight and getting a higher level wizard to drop to 0 hit points can radically change the combat. And with the change that now they have to have 25 hit points or fewer, means that the Banshee's firmly planted into its own CR bracket. And I get, like, I'm not a massive fan of that, because it makes it so that the creature is more or less useful in more situations. And it also means that if the players don't have 25 or fewer hit points when they encounter it at their level, then half of the Banshee's abilities just don't work anyway. So I'm not a massive fan of the changes to the Banshee. Not at all. Let's have a look at the Death Knight. I know a lot of people are massive fans of Death Knights. Let's have a look at how the Death Knight has changed. Its AC is probably the same. It's had a hit point bump up to 199, which is pretty nice. It still has immunities to necrotic and poison, exhaustion, frightened, and poisoned. And then it still gets it gets legendary resistances now. It never got legendary resistances in 2014. So it gets 3 of them a day now, and it still gets its magic resistance. It can marshal undead. So undead creatures of a Death Knight's choice, excluding itself, in a 60-foot emanation originating from it, have advantage on attack rolls and saving throws. So broadly the same, except it's not broadly the same, is it? So in 2014, they had advantage on saving throws against features that turn undead. Now, the Martial Undead just gives them advantage on attack rolls and saving throws. I very nearly missed that, but Martial Undead is just much better. So, all undead within 60 feet will just get advantage on their attack rolls, which is just better than it was. And they get advantage on saving throws, which will be all saving throws. So it'll be features that turn undead and anything else. So Martial Undead, way better than it was. Undead Restoration is a new feature in the Death Knight. If they're destroyed before they atone for their evil, they gain a new body in 1d10 days, reviving with all their hit points. The new body appears in a location significant to the Death Knight. So it's another instance where they can revive. There's a couple of monsters that didn't have a revival mechanic that have been given one. Aboleths have got a revival mechanic, Eldritch something, where if they're destroyed, they come back. Let me have a quick look at what that ability actually is whilst I'm talking about it, because that's why, because there we go, Aboleth. So the Aboleth's one is called Eldritch Restoration. If destroyed, the Aboleth gains a new body in 5d10 days, reviving with all its hit points in the far realm or another location chosen by the DM. And that's a really odd choice. And I've seen a couple of them, a couple of monsters now that previously didn't get the ability to come back to life, that now have the ability to come back to life, seemingly out of nowhere. And I'm not the biggest fan of mechanics like that when they don't also come with the ability to like undo that. Like a lot of demons and devils, a lot of fiends have that kind of ability, but they have a rider that says if they're killed by something that is blessed, or if you sprinkle holy water on them or bury them in consecrated ground, that will undo it. Whereas like the Death Knight, just it will revive if it hasn't atoned for its evil. The like that atones for its evil is doing a lot of heavy lifting and putting a lot of burden on the DM to figure all that out. Similarly with the Aboleth, if it's destroyed, it gains a new body in 5d10 days. There's nothing that gives you any indication as to how you can stop that. So in theory, Aboleths are just invincible. They will always, and they hold grudges. Like, I'm sure that is one of their, like, they have terrifying intellects and they hold grudges. So you kill an Aboleth, then in 5d10 days, they're just going to come back for you. They're going to start hunting you, and you kill it again, and they're just going to keep coming back because there's nothing in here that provides any sort of indication as to how you undo that. And it's an odd choice. I don't dislike the concept of monsters being able to come back to life. Just give me something to hold on to, even if it is as vague as atoning for the Death Knight's evil, to be able to figure out how narratively we get around this thing that can just always keep coming back. Like liches have got a soul jar built into their lore, so it's really easy to understand how you get rid of them forever. But it's a side rant. Oh. The Death Knight complete tangent. 2014's Death Knight had a whole bunch of spellcasting. 2024 has a smaller batch of spellcasting. It has Command, Phantom Steed, Destructive Wave, and Dispel Magic. It also gets Hellfire Orb as a rechargeable ability, and then it can command as a legendary action. Excuse me. And so it's got less in the way of spells. Then it has 3 Dreadblade attacks, which are doing 25 damage total versus the 28 damage from the longsword previously, so I think it's actually had a damage drop, which is again surprising, especially at CR 17. I don't expect to see drops in damage output at CR 17. And then Hellfire Orb is broadly the same, I think. 120 feet, is 20 foot radius, DC 18, 10d6, 10d6. Yeah, pretty much the same. So its actions are basically the same. Gets less spells, does a little bit less damage, but then it can parry, which it could before, adds 6 to its AC, which is the same. And then it gets reactions, and then it gets legendary actions. So it gets legendary actions in the new Monster Manual, which it didn't in 2014. So it can cast Command, it can do Fell Word, which requires a con save, or they take a bunch of necrotic damage, and their hit point maximum decreases by an amount equal to the damage taken. Again, I think that's going to be another case where only Greater Restoration is going to fix that. I like that. And then they can move half their speed and make 1 Dreadblade attack. So they get 3 legendary actions. So that overall damage output is probably higher in 2024-25, the new Monster Manual, than it was in 2014. It's just spread out a little bit differently. And they will regenerate their body in 1d10 days. So slightly more interesting, and that Martial Undead makes them a much more interesting commander. But my problem is at CR 17, like that's a little bit too high to be like the commander of armies having an ability like that. Like you are a tier 4 party in the 15 to 17 region. You're not fighting Death Knight and like a large force of undead. Like you're probably not. There are new Death Knight aspirants, which are CR 11 lower Death Knights. They can also use the Martial Undead ability and give them other undead advantage on attack rolls and saving throws, and I actually think they might be what I would use as, like, they are remarkably similar to the Death Knight. That's incredible. Wow. Their AC is 20, their hit points are 178, so they've got the same AC, they've only got 20 hit points in difference. They don't get legendary resistances or legendary actions, but they get magic resistance, they martial undead, they make 3 Dreadblade attacks, they get Hellfire Orb, they get spellcasting, and they get parry. The Dread Knight Aspirant is almost identical to the Dread Knight, and I think 18,000 XP for the Dread Knight itself, and 7,200 for the Aspirant. So you could get 2.5 Dread Knight Aspirants for a regular Death Knight. I think you might just be better off taking Death Knight Aspirants instead of Death Knights. I know that that's getting into like optimization, wargamery territory, like list building, but they have almost the same hit points, they have almost the same AC, they lack the legendary resistances. That's the biggest defensive thing they have. They don't regenerate in 1d10 days, but like in a moment-to-moment combat, that's not important. Excuse me. In their damage output, they are broadly the same. A little bit less, but not meaningfully so. But 1 Dread Knight can put out 3 Dreadblade attacks, or could then do 3 legendary actions to put out a total of 6. Or you could have 2 Dread Knight Aspirants that put out 6 attacks. Their HP is split across 2 creatures, making the action economy of the players less effective. They're the same AC, more hit points than you'd get within the Dread Knight. You'd still have XP budget left over to dump into an absolute metric ton of lower undead that they could use their martial undead on to give them advantage on the rolls. I actually don't think there's any situation where I'd use a Death Knight and not 2 aspirants, because they are so close in their stat block. Unless I'm missing some, I've got to be missing something. They've got basically the same. The only spell that the Death Knight has that the aspirant doesn't is command, and it has a legendary action that allows it to use the command. So it can command, and that is about it. But for everything else, there's MasterCard or the Death Knight aspirant. So yeah, I would take the aspirant, a couple of the aspirants, and a metric ton of lower CR undead to bog down the players and give them advantage from the aspirants. How are we getting on for time? We are almost at the 2-hour mark, so we are going to call it in just a few minutes. So we've got time for one more monster. If someone wants to suggest a monster to look at in the chat, first come, first serve. First person to put a monster in, we will take a look. Otherwise, we're going to call it for the evening. Let me go ahead and take off the undead filter and refilter it by all, and we can have a looky loo. Let's have a look on the new monsters and see whether anything jumps out to me. I did have a list in my mind of monsters that I was like, I need to make sure I look at these monsters because they're the classic monsters that I want to like compare and contrast. The Archmage. Let's have a look at the Archmage, because it was weak source in 2014, and that's what we'll end off the evening with. And I want to see if it's been made significantly better. So our 2014 Archmage, CR 12 with an AC of 12, 15 with mage armor, but still such low AC, absolutely ridiculous. The 2024 version, or the new version, the Archmage still CR 12, but its AC is now 17, so it's had a pretty significant bump in its AC. That is with mage armor, and it's also had a huge bump in hit points, up to 170 from 99. Again, that's counting for the resistances to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical damage. It has a +7 to its initiative, so its initiative has gotten way better. Its passive perception has gotten better as well. It's had buffs to a lot of its abilities, its skills and things. And its saving throws are... Let's have a quick looky-loo. Its saving throws are broadly the same. Yeah, saving throws are the same. It has magical resistance like it did in 2014. And then let's have a look at spells. So the biggest problem with the Archmage in 2014 is it got one piddly dagger attack and then just a whole bunch of spells, and trying to figure out what you wanted to do with those spells was a bit of a mess. And it's much cleaner in the 2025, the new Monster Manual. So it gets protective magic as a reaction, which you can do 3 times a day. It can cast counter spell or shield in response to those spells triggers. So it can up its AC to 22, or it can counter spell. It can do a combination of those things 3 times a day. That's less, I believe, than it could do for counter spell previously. But I don't even think it got... Did it even get shield? No, it didn't even get shield in 2014, which is real bad. but it did get fire shield, which is not the same. But it can't counterspell as often, but it does get shield. Its protective magic is 3 a day, not 3 a day each, so it's not fantastic. It does get a bonus action Misty Step, so it does have some maneuverability. Let's see, it had Misty Step in 2014. It could have cast Misty Step. And then spellcasting, it's at will spells in the new book are Detect Magic, Detect Thoughts, Disguise Self, Invisibility, Light, Mage Armor, which is already included in its armor class, Mage Hand, and Prestidigitation. So invisibility is the really big one. Being able to at will be invisible is pretty major. Then twice a day it can cast Fly or Lightning Bolt. Both of those are twice a day each. That Lightning Bolt is the 7th level version. And then once a day it can cast a level 9 version of Cone of Cold, a Mind Blank, which it casts before combat, so it's immune to psychic damage and a charmed condition, and anything that would target its alignment, read its emotion, mentally detect its location, can't do that. And then it can also cast Scrying and Teleport once a day. Its list of spells is significantly worse. Like losing out on Time Stop, huge. Losing out on Globe of Invulnerability, losing out on Banishment, losing out on Stone Skin, which is where the non-magical damage, etc., etc. Let's see, what do we have? Does Stone Skin still exist? Stone Skin. It does. Till spell ends, the creature you touch has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. I would have loved it to have kept Stone Skin. Yeah, I do think the Archmage, whilst more survivable in the new Monster Manual, doesn't have nearly as interesting a suite of spells. Like, it can probably do more damage because it can make 4 Arcane Burst attacks. Or do spellcasting. So the Arcane Burst is 27 force damage. So it can output 108 damage around, which isn't nothing. It's quite a nice, like, damage dealer, like little artillery piece. But I want my archmages to be weaving the fabric of reality around their fingers and like stopping time and doing awesome wizard duels, and not just being an artillery piece that does 100 force damage a turn, you know? And I think that their list of spells from 2014 was much more impressive with that, especially given that the 2024-25 Monster Manual doesn't allow you to swap out any of those arcane bursts for a spell casting. You have to forego doing 100 damage in your round to cast one of these spells, which is real bad. Like, Lightning Bolt deals 8d6, and it does the 7th level version. But 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's doing 12d6. So a Lightning Bolt is doing 42 average damage when they're casting it in a line. Yeah, you're going to catch, hopefully, a lot of people. But it's not great. I think I'd still rather just put 2 Arcane Bursts into 2 people, if you're assuming that an area of effect or multiple target spell is hitting 2 people minimum. Cone of Cold is 8d8, and then above 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12d8 damage for Cone of Cold. 12 times 4.5. So Cone of Cold is doing 54. Again, I think I'd rather just have the Arcane Bursts, unless the targets are really packed in, or you've got a lot of friendly mobs to the players on the battlefield. So yeah, I would have preferred them to have just bumped the HP and the AC of the old Archmage. What I may do if I were running an Archmage is take the 2024 stat block and just use the 2014 spells. So keep everything about the 2025. Keep the new stat block, but just ditch its spells for 2014 spells and exactly how they were, because the breadth of spells that it has is much more interesting. Mirror image, counter spell, like probably keep counter spell and Misty Step in the bonus action and reaction element, and keep shield. So drop counter spell, but does the new one fly? It can fly. It can fly twice a day. Cool. But being able to have mirror image, banishment, stone skin, wall of force, globe of invulnerability, mind, and time stop, it's just much more interesting spells going on in the Archmage in 2014. So that's almost certainly what I'd do. It would be a combination of the two. Take the Archmage stats from the new Monster Manual, keep its bonus actions and its reactions, the Misty Step and the protective magic, keep its AC and its hit points from the new Monster Manual, but then take its spell casting from 2014 and give it a wider selection of spells, because losing out on a lot of those interesting spells is a real shame. But with that, I think we're going to call it there for this evening, because my voice is starting to go. There's a whole bunch of talking, but I hope that you've gotten some insight into what I've just kicked something over. Insight into what's going on in the new Monster Manual. I'm going to be diving into this in more depth over the next couple of weeks, and in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be making a review video going over my full thoughts after having a further play around with the book. In next week's stream, what are we doing in next week's stream? Let's check the old schedule and have a look, because I'm pretty sure I have written it down, but I can't remember what we're doing. Next week, I think we're going to do a map making stream, if I can get the software to play nice with OBS. So provided it doesn't make OBS have a full-on nightmare and hate its life, we're going to do a map making stream. I'm going to open up Incarnate. We're going to do some cozy map making and do some dungeon mapping, and that'll be good fun. So tune in for that, same bat time, same bat channel, 8 p.m. UK time on Tuesday next week. But until then, I've been Anto. You've been watching Icarus Games. If you haven't already, join the Discord and get involved in conversation with a whole bunch of people who also love TTRPG stuff. And until next time, happy gaming.